Think about this. Because of two ideas, millions of people died. Because of two ideas, empires fell apart, walls came down, and wars began. And neither of those ideas ever worked the way they promised. But no ideology influencer will ever tell you that. Today, I'm not going to talk to you about ambiguity. I'm going to talk to you about reality. And I promise you, by the end of this video, the way you look at the system will be different. Welcome to the Notes of a Financial Historian, the place where money, power, and history collide. Let's begin. But not from today, not from 1917, not from 1929, and not from Karl Marx, much further back in history. Throughout history, what was called economics was not really economics at all. It was survival. The king ruled by divine right. The landowner held all the power. The peasant could only produce enough not to die of hunger. Productivity moved like glaciers. For centuries, life was actually a zero-sum game. If one person rose, another had to fall. Wealth and power came from land, labor, and war. The idea that an ordinary person could become rich through trade or innovation would have been madness in that era. Then the Industrial Revolution shattered the world. By the end of the 1700s, England was a pressure cooker made of coal, iron, capital, and opportunistic ambition. Machines made human muscle obsolete, factories overtook workshops, and an entirely new kind of power was born, the power of private capital. For the first time, individuals could invest, take risks, and own on a scale that had previously belonged only to kings. Productivity exploded. For some, wages rose. For others, misery deepened. Inequality spread and expanded at a pace the world had never seen before. Pollution choked cities. Children worked 12-hour shifts. Disease multiplied in slum neighborhoods. But no matter how ugly the picture was, one truth was impossible to deny. Capitalism was producing more goods, more wealth, and more speed on a scale the world had never seen before. Socialism was born exactly at this point, not as a utopian dream, but as a desperate reaction to the brutality of industrial capitalism. In the middle of the 1800s, when Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels saw the smokestacks, the worker uprisings and factory floors stained with sweat and blood, they arrived at this conclusion. The system itself was a crime. They saw capitalist wealth as stolen labor. If workers jointly owned the factories, if profits were shared, if production served human need instead of private gain, society would finally become prosperous. There would be no exploitation, no bubbles and crashes, only rational planning and equal dignity. It sounds so clean, elegant, and moral. To millions of people living under the gears of early capitalism, it sounded like justice. But real life is something else, and theories are only that. When socialism was first seriously tried on a national scale, it did not happen in a classroom, but in the ashes of an empire. After the Russian Revolution of 1917, Lenin inherited a country like a wreckage of hunger, illiteracy, and backwardness. The Tsar was dead. The old elites had fled or been ended, and suddenly a massive territory of 150 million people needed a new operating system. The Soviets built such a system. State ownership of land, factories, banks, and resources. Bureaucrats were the ones setting prices. Production targets replaced profit motives. Private enterprise was erased. In theory, it was expected to create perfect equality and efficiency, but in practice it created chaos. Market prices had determined what people wanted and how much to produce. Factories without competition did not innovate. Workers without personal reward made no effort to go beyond the minimum. Scarcity became normal. Queues became a culture, and agriculture, the backbone of the Russian economy, collapsed, giving way to famine. Lenin had to step back and allow limited private trade just to keep the country standing. Yet something strange happened. Despite all its failures, socialism kept its appeal, because capitalism did not look very bright either. In the early 20th century, capitalism had achieved enormous growth, but it had also brought savage instability. Speculation ran out of control. Trust came to dominate entire sectors. The rich lived like modern rulers, while millions of people struggled to survive. This imbalance exploded in 1929 with the collapse of the U.S. stock market, and capitalism suffered its most devastating breakdown. The Great Depression was not a slowdown. It was a global economic heart attack. Banks had failed. Unemployment reached 25%. The financial systems of many countries collapsed and were wiped out. To millions of observers, capitalism looked not just flawed, but deadly. So by the 1930s, the world was facing an uncomfortable reality. No system was delivering what it had promised. Socialism promised equality and delivered scarcity. Capitalism promised prosperity and delivered collapse. Then came the moment that changed everything. The Second World War. War forced every major economy to test its own system under maximum pressure. Despite all its inefficiencies, the Soviet Union mobilized its entire population with terrifying speed and discipline. State control made it possible to redirect all resources toward survival. Meanwhile, capitalist countries like the United States turned into industrial supermachines, proving how powerful private innovation could be when supported by national coordination. When the war ended, the counting was no longer ideological. It was now GDP, infrastructure, growth, and living standards. And from 1945 to 1991, the world became almost like a laboratory. On one side, the Soviet bloc. State control had taken over. Central planning had suppressed markets. On the other side, the United States and its allies. Regulated capitalism, private enterprise, but with social safety nets left over from the Depression era. This was the real experiment, not manifestos, not speeches, real life, in which millions of people lived with the results. The results were striking, but just as painful. In the Soviet Union, the first decade brought rapid industrialization. Literacy rates had risen, housing expanded, military power surged. But beneath the surface, the system was cracking. Without price signals, the economy was dragged into absurd inefficiency. Factories produced unusable goods just to fill quotas. Farms delivered rotten harvests, and innovation came almost to a halt. By the 1970s, the USSR had fallen decades behind in consumer technology. A country that could build rockets had become unable to produce a small refrigerator. Capitalism, on the other hand, adapted. After the Great Depression, governments introduced regulation, deposit insurance, antitrust laws, social security, public health systems, and unemployment benefits. Capitalism did not become fair, but it became livable. It learned from its mistakes, and that ability to adapt became its ultimate weapon. By the 1980s, the gap had become impossible to deny. While the West's quality of life was rising, the Soviet economy had come to a standstill. The Cold War was not won by ideology, it was won by performance. When the Berlin Wall fell in 1989, the debate seemed to have been settled. The Soviet Union was not defeated by war or invasions. It was defeated by empty shelves, broken incentives, and an economy that could no longer adapt. A system designed to eliminate inequality created a new elite, party leaders, bureaucrats, and insiders. While ordinary citizens struggled to survive, a system built to overcome market chaos collapsed under the weight of its own rigid planning. When the numbers finally appeared, they told a blunt story. Western economies were more efficient, more innovative, and more adaptable. But capitalism's victory celebration did not last long, because the Cold War had ended, but the economic contradictions had not. In the 1990s and 2000s, capitalism sharpened again. This time it turned into something even 19th century theorists could not have predicted. Finance exploded, global supply chains spread across continents, and credit flowed like water. Inequality reappeared, this time on a scale that recalled the Gilded Age. Corporations became transnational powers, and whole economies became dependent on debt, speculation, and asset bubbles. The 2008 financial crisis hit like déjà vu, a reminder that capitalism's instability had never really disappeared. It had only returned wearing new clothes. At this point, I need to remind you of something important. At the beginning of the video, I said, your view of the system will change, didn't it? Because now we are coming to the real twist. Meanwhile, socialism returned to the market, but this time not in the old Soviet form, in a softer, more nostalgic way. Calls for wealth, taxes, nationalized healthcare, free education, strong unions, and economic balancing began to reappear in many countries. Young generations crushed under housing costs and stagnant wages began to question whether capitalism still worked for everyone. The debate was reborn, but this time there was one striking turn. This time people did not want pure capitalism or pure socialism, because history had painfully clarified the trade-offs. Look at modern Scandinavia. These countries, often wrongly labeled socialist, have free markets, private enterprise, and global corporations. But they also have high taxes, strong social protections, and strong unions. This is capitalism with guardrails, a mixed economy that protects innovation while trying to grind down inequality. Now look at the United States, a capitalist giant that offers immense innovation, financial depth, and global influence, but also struggles with staggering wealth gaps, decaying infrastructure, unaffordable healthcare, and a melting middle class. Look at China. This country, which presents the most fascinating form of the case, is the world's largest authoritarian capitalist economy. Beijing calls it socialism with Chinese characteristics. But in reality, it looks far more like state-directed capitalism. Growth is driven by private firms, the government controls strategic sectors, and markets are allowed to develop when they serve national priorities. Even so, China too faces the same contradictions: debt-indexed growth, housing bubbles, demographic decline, slowing productivity. When you take one step back, you see that the truth is embarrassingly simple. The big economies of today are actually hybrids, a mixture of markets and state power, incentives and protections, freedom and control. Not because ideologies failed, but because reality forced compromise. When systems collide with real human behavior, with ambition, greed, fear, laziness, and creativity, no theory can stand completely intact. And that is exactly the disturbing lesson. Economic systems do not shape societies as much as we think. On the contrary, people shape economic systems. Socialism or capitalism does not erase human nature. It only expresses itself differently. Under pure capitalism, greed becomes innovation until it turns into exploitation. Under pure socialism, equality becomes unity until it turns into oppression. In markets, power concentrates on the basis of wealth. In planned economies, power concentrates on the basis of politics. Different systems, same human tendencies. Different propaganda, same flaws. History gives us the answer. The real question is not which system is better. It is which system has the best mechanisms to restrain power, correct mistakes, and reward useful behavior. The system that adapts wins. Capitalism owes its survival to its ability to reinvent itself, from laissez-faire to the New Deal, to globalized finance, to technology capitalism. Socialism collapsed where it refused to evolve, the Soviet Union, Maoist China, North Korea. But socialism flourished where it merged with markets, Scandinavia, post-1978 China, and parts of Western Europe. What determined the winners was adaptation, not ideology. You do not need a master's degree in economics to understand why. It is enough to see what each system prioritizes. Capitalism prioritizes incentives. When it works well, it unleashes creativity, risk-taking, and productivity. People build, innovate, experiment, because they gain something for themselves. But its downside is inequality, instability, and cycles that punish the vulnerable. Socialism prioritizes equality. When it works well, it reduces poverty, expands access, and secures basic dignity. But without incentives, productivity stalls. Without markets, information collapses. Without open institutions, corruption grows like an avalanche. Both systems have strengths, both have failures, and both have historical wounds. The modern world that you and I live in was built on the edge of these wounds. Every safety net, every regulation, every market rule, every welfare program, every financial instrument carries the DNA of this century-long war. The mixed economies we live in are not proof that one system won. They are proof that neither could survive on its own. But here is the real twist that most people miss. The debate is shifting again. Because the challenges of the 21st century, AI-driven transformation, demographic collapse, climate risk, energy transitions, global debt, do not care about ideology. They expose the weak points of both systems. Market capitalism struggles with long-term planning and social cohesion. Socialist planning struggles with flexibility and innovation. The countries that will come out on top in the next century will be the ones that can combine the two most effectively: the creativity of markets with the resilience of public investment. Private innovation and public direction, freedom and stability. What the last century taught us is this: no system works without guardrails. No economy can stand without incentives, and no society can thrive when wealth or power, whether concentrated in billionaires or bureaucrats, becomes too consolidated. History did not choose capitalism or socialism. History chose everything that prevents collapse, and every generation has to renegotiate that balance, because the debate was never really about capitalism versus socialism. It was always about who controls the levers inside every system: capital, the state, banks, unions, corporations, the party, regulators. The real war has always been about the same thing: power. And power, as history has shown again and again, does not disappear. It only changes hands. If this gave you a new perspective, subscribe to my channel. History has answers. I will show you where to look.